dear friend Larry Johnson is here with us. Welcome back, Larry.
All right. I'm glad you got the memo on the shirt. Be spectacular. You are. Okay.
Thank you. You too, Larry. And let's start with what we've learned from CENTCOM. Breaking some sort of breaking news moments ago. They announced that the United States disables 2 more vessels violating the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. But they hit these 2 vessels in the Gulf of Oman. And Larry, last night we had the same. 2 tankers were attacked. One of them was close to, it was entering the Strait of Hormuz from the Fujairah, close to the Fujairah port in the UAE. The other one was close to Iran, Josk, as they call it, the city of Josk. And they both were attacked by U.S. destroyers. And where are we heading? Where are we headed? And what is your understanding of what's going on in the region?
Well, we're headed back to full-scale war. There's not going to be a negotiated settlement. There's not some secret negotiation that they're near an agreement. That's just all bullshit, and people need to stop falling for it. God, it's like this is a version of Charlie Brown and Lucy with a football. Come on, Charlie, come kick it, and the world comes running up, and boom, falls on its ass. Time. This is what is this, like the 5th or 6th time? The war's been going on since February 28th. So let's see, March, April. Yeah. So we're day 70 now, for people to understand that. And we're going to be, we'll be still meeting, talking about this on day 120. But what is going to happen between day 70 and day 120 is the full impact of the disruption of the commodities that were coming out of the Persian Gulf prior to the start of this war will finally be impacting the world economy, and it's going to be ugly. Trump they don't have a military strategy. Okay, they're going to blow up, they're going to destroy a few tankers, and then Iran's going to retaliate. They'll probably eventually succeed in sinking 1 U.S. destroyer. And then that's going to lead the United States to be enraged, and we've got to do more. Trump just he lives in a fantasy land. I was listening to him earlier today saying about the United States, won World War II. We won the war in the Pacific largely. It was largely our effort in the Pacific, along with the Chinese. Actually, the Chinese played a critical role by keeping 70% of the Japanese forces pinned down in China. But to make that claim about Europe is just nonsense. And this is all about insulting Russia. So, insult Russia, insult Iran, insult China. They're doing stuff. The United States is supposed to be meeting with, Trump's supposed to meet with Xi Jinping next week. But, the United States is still taking some aggressive moves. A friend of mine sent me a list here. Let me just, where are you, Simon? Simon says, so the U.S. State Department issued a warning through diplomatic channels about Chinese AI theft. Beijing demands cancellation of the Meta purchase of Manaus in Singapore. And then the U.S. ordered chip equipment manufacturers to halt shipments to China. So, instead of trying to say, hey, how can we ease tensions? How can we back away? It's just, one irritant after another. If Trump goes to China, he's going to get a very frosty relationship. It's not going to be warm and cuddly. So, all of this is leading back to this war on Iran. The U.S. is now trying to provoke it into retaliating, and Iran's going to retaliate. And when the retaliation starts, the United States is not going to like it. And Israel will be hit particularly hard.
How do you see the UAE? UAE was so happy last night about the attacks on Iranians. And I don't know, today we've seen the footage coming out of UAE. They're censoring everything, but at least we've got some sort of footage from UAE and some points in the Dubai airport were attacked or were hit, you see a large plumes of smoke.
Yeah.
And how do you put UAE in the calculation of the United States?
Yeah, well, the UAE has they've made a very, very bad bet. They have aligned themselves closely with Israel and with the United States now in this war, separating themselves even from the other Gulf Arabs, dissing Saudi Arabia, Qatar. I think the full blown where there are 2 to 3 launches of missiles per day out of Iran against U.S. military targets and Israeli targets. When that starts, Dubai is going to be the first one hit. For Raja, the port, its last port that's in the Gulf of Oman, which allows the UAE still to export some oil, get some income, that'll be taken out. And then Al Dhafra Air Base, I think, will be destroyed. So the level of destruction, everyone's been very careful to hide the damage that Iran did in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Israel. And they can try to pretend nothing happened, but the physical reality of what happened is undeniable. So we're in for another round of escalation. Whatever hopes people had that there would be some sort of negotiated settlement, that the United States would agree to basically restart the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement. That's ridiculous, because you have to look at what is being said by U.S. officials, not just Trump, but by the Marco Rubios and Pete Hegseth, and then just pundits on television. They portray Iran as this irredeemable terrorist state that is got a foot on the throat of the Iranian people, and that there's the people just can't wait to get rid of the clerics and be free, and that Iran is a threat to all of its neighbors. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So there is no room in the rhetoric to allow a negotiation process where at the end of it would say, hey, we're going to recognize the sovereignty of Iran and that it is a sovereign state. The United States will not recognize Iran as a sovereign state until forced to do so. That's what it's going to take.
There are 2 stories about Operation Freedom being concluded before reaching any sort of outcome. One of them is that the United States couldn't convince Saudi Arabia and Kuwait to cooperate with that operation. The other thing is what Donald Trump said, that the wonderful leadership in Pakistan asked us not to do it. And which scenario is real, and how do you see, the Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and other countries, GCC countries?
Well, they're playing a dangerous game. It's very true. NBC reported that the Saudis had denied U.S. permission to use Prince Saud Air Base to conduct any air operations against Iran, for Project Freedom, as they called it. And I checked with somebody, said, is this true? And then somebody who's in a position to know, he says, no, it's true. It's been a real problem for us. Now they claim that the Saudis have reversed. Maybe. I'll have to try to get independent confirmation of that too, because it was underscoring the limits of U.S. power that both the Saudis and Kuwaitis said, no, you're not using our airspace right now. The United States doesn't have the naval power, ships to effect a blockade, but they may have enough air power to start. If they start, bombing, it's an act of war. If they start attacking Iranian ships with bombs and sinking them, Iran's going to have no choice but to start retaliating and retaliating in a massive fashion. So, like I said, this is not headed towards peace. This is headed towards a bigger war.
Yeah. I think Donald Trump find himself in a situation that is obviously desperate because Europe is not happy, is not willing to help him with the case of the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia and GCC countries, they've seen what has happened with American bases in their countries. So they're so much cautious right now. You mentioned these two. I don't know if these reports are right or they're false, but after all, they're more cautious right now. That's why we have some sort of division, UAE going toward Israel, closer to Israel, and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait together with Qatar. They're trying to find their way of dealing with this issue. But nobody is willing to help Donald Trump. This is the problem. And Iranians are not going to help Donald Trump to save face.
Yeah, well, the real critical country to look at, I think, is Qatar. So, let's run down just in terms of who produces what and ships what. So roughly 32% of the global oil supply comes out of the Persian Gulf. So I'd heard it was 20%, but I did additional research last night and it said, nope, it's 32%. So the oil disruption is even greater than people imagine. LNG, well, the principal producer of LNG in the Persian Gulf is Qatar. So more so than Saudi Arabia. So Qatar plays a key role in the LNG, and that market's disrupted. And they count the total LNG, if you will. Qatar contributes 20% roughly of the global supply. Then the urea exporters, again, the major players there: Qatar, Saudi Arabia, along with Iran. Sulfur. So 44% of the world's supply of sulfur comes out of the Persian Gulf, and those applications, they do phosphate fertilizer production, metal ore processing, petroleum refining, semiconductor wafer cleaning, battery manufacturing, pharmaceuticals. So, when you're talking about disrupting 44% of the world's production on that front, it's significant. And again, that means that the big players here are Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Helium is another 33%. Guess which country in the Persian Gulf produces the most of the helium? That's Qatar. It's after the U.S. is the largest producer in the world, followed by Qatar. So my point on this is we've already seen that actually Iran has been taking a much more diplomatic route with Qatar, and Qatar has not been as aggressive as Saudi Arabia has in playing a double game. So that, keep your eyes on Qatar to understand where the future of this conflict is headed, because I foresee that that Qatar could turn around to the United States and say, "Hey, get your bases. They're closing Al Udeid. Goodbye. We're done hosting you." If that happens, then that'll be sort of the final sign that Iran has won the war.
Yeah, but it's not going to be. You mentioned the situation with the oil and gas, but we know that during the war, 17% of the capacity of producing gas or exporting gas of Qatar was somehow disabled during the war. That's why they're not going to get back anytime soon. This is the problem. Let's assume tomorrow the war is over.
Right.
Is that gonna solve the problem? Is that gonna put an end to the difficulties that the global economy is feeling right now?
Yeah, no, it is going to take it would take at least 6 months to start having a feeling of maybe being back to normal. But, we don't really have a full assessment yet of the extent of the damage done to the infrastructure, particularly for producing helium and smelting aluminum. So this is up to this point, the world keeps like pretending that this is no big deal. That this is just temporary. The disruption in the global supply of oil is real, and it's only now starting to affect countries as their reserves run out. I've never seen anything like that. You expect sort of traditional economic theory to kick in, which says that if you've got a shortage of something, the price of it is going to go up. Well, in this case, we're not talking about delays in delivery. We're talking about an actual physical disruption of what appears to be 1/3 of the world's supply of oil. And everyone's pretending like, oh, this is just temporary. This is no big deal. It's a huge deal, but it's not just oil. When you combine the shortage, the 20% reduction in the LNG, the 36 production in the urea for fertilizer, the same with sulfur. Sulfur and urea are used in the fertilizer production process. And then helium, which is critical for the chip industry. And I mean, I've never seen the financial markets are acting as if this is no big deal. And I would argue it's a huge deal.
And do you know why is that the case? And how is that going to be, it's some sort of manipulation by the Trump administration, or?
Yeah, there is manipulation of the markets. That's for sure. We saw that on Monday with the announcement that, an agreement, the agreement's near. Oh, we're going to just a few I's to dot and T's to cross. It turned out it was absolutely not true. But somebody in the Bush realm knew that was going to come down, that what Bush was going to say, because like 20, 30 minutes before he did it, they bought thousands of future contracts. So they were placing a bet that the future price of oil was going to decline. And the way you work what's called a short is you essentially take the existing price share, like let's say it's $90 a share, and so you pay a fee to borrow, in this case, let's say 100,000 shares. You're going to borrow 100,000 shares. And that means you got to pay it back, say on a particular date. And so what happens when the price of that oil future goes from 90 down to 80, man, you run right out. You buy all of the 80 share, all the shares that you owe at a price of 80, and that way you return those shares, but you've now made the difference, that difference between 90 and 80, that spread. That's where you make your money. So it is. That's the game that they were playing, and they've done this. This has happened several times, 4 or 5 times over the course of the last, going on 2.5 months now since this war has been underway. And I don't know if what we're looking at is ignorance as well among these very so-called sophisticated traders, that they just refuse to sit down and look at the numbers, or they keep believing that, somebody in the government, they've got this under control. They think nobody could be this stupid. Oh boy, trust me, they can be.
Yeah. Does it seem that Donald Trump is happy with the situation that he's in? Because it seems that he makes a lot of money out of the chaos he has made in the Middle East. Yeah,
no, that's very true. I'm hearing different reports. There was a person who I have a lot of trust in terms of the reliability of his reporting, says that Trump has been terribly frustrated. He's trying to find a way out, and he can't. There is no way out where he can come out and say, "Hey, I'm the winner. We've accomplished all of our goals. It's like the other day, Marco Rubio said, oh, yeah, we've ended Epic Fury. Epic Fury's ended. We accomplished all of our objectives. What the hell were the objectives? I mean, what? Seriously, what did you accomplish other than allowing your bases throughout the Gulf region to be attacked and destroyed, depleting your supplies of critical offensive and defensive missiles, with the Tomahawks, JASSMs, PAC-3 interceptors, THAAD interceptors. What have you accomplished other than potentially crippling the world's economy? Nothing. And so that's what makes it just so, you're scratching your head. This is, I do believe this remains as Iran, by virtue of its location, is a critical chess piece in the future of the world economy going forward. And Russia and China recognize that, and which is why Iran was brought into BRICS. The United States recognizes it as well and wants to create, sort of this East-West, what they call it, IMEC. But in the process, the other element is they cannot stomach or tolerate the Islamic Republic. You can't have an Iranian government that is independent of the West, of Western influence. You got to have a government that's going to do exactly what Washington and Europe tell them to do.
But do they feel that they can get it with what has happened so far?
Oh no, that's the problem. There's a growing realization of how limited U.S. power is. Yeah, we can inflict damage on Iran. There's no doubting that. But it's not a matter of how much damage can you inflict. It is, can you bring about a change, create such a level of loss and suffering that Iran would turn around and say, stop. We can't continue this. Stop. No, that's not going to happen because Iran has options. They are not cut off from the rest of the world. Yes, if they did not have the support of Russia, China, and Pakistan, for starters, yeah, they'd be in a very difficult position. I would doubt that they would be able to sustain this, but it's just the opposite. They've got the full backing of Russia, China, and now Pakistan. So Iran, I'd venture to say that Iran's economy is probably going to do better in 2026 than it did in 2025.
There are two scenarios, Larry, for the Strait of Hormuz. On one side, Iran has just defined a new mechanism for the Strait of Hormuz. Mm-hmm. The other one is what Marco Rubio is talking about. Free navigation through the strait, and nobody gonna pay anything. If someone pays, the United States gonna sanction them. I don't know, how do you see the leverage of these two sides fighting each other when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz? Because right now, as we talk, more than 1,500 tankers are waiting in the Strait of Hormuz to pass through the strait.
Right. Yeah, no, the U.S. doesn't. The U.S. once thought it had leverage, it no longer does. Yeah, I can make those threats, and we saw what happened the other day when it threatened China. China basically told Trump to go fuck off. Told his companies pay no attention to the threat of sanctions. If they sanction you, we got your back. You're not going to be threatened. And I expect we'll soon see a similar response by Russia along the same lines. So this is, the days of the United States being able to bully and threaten, we're going to sanction you with this, sanction you with that. You get to the point where the rest of the world says, we don't care, we're not going to deal with you anymore.
Larry, can the Strait of Hormuz be the basis for the new security architecture of the region? Because those countries who are using the Strait of Hormuz, who are dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, they can come together. How do you see that?
Yeah, that was the most important thing that came out this last week, what you just said, security architecture. Putin used that phrase, well, actually a week ago Monday, Putin used that phrase with respect to his conversations with the foreign minister, Arachi. And then this week in China, the Chinese foreign minister, also Wang Yi, said the same thing, used the same phrase, security architecture. So yeah, what China, Russia, Iran are going to be doing is building a new security architecture in the Persian Gulf. And I think one of the first ones are going to work most focus on is Qatar, followed by Saudi Arabia. They get those two on. Everybody else, Bahrain, Kuwait will follow. UAE will try to stay on the outside, but it's going to find itself isolated, and it will have picked the wrong side.
Yeah. I don't see UAE being an important player in the Middle East anymore, Larry, because they have decided to go to cooperate with Israel, which, after all, we know, whatever happens to UAE, the Saudi Arabia condemned what has happened 2 days ago in UAE, but we know what is happening below the surface, how they feel about each other.
Mm-hmm.
And you've mentioned Qatar and UAE. I would bring Oman as well into the calculation.
Well, yeah, I should have said that, because Oman is actually already part of the Iran network. So Iran has coordinated with Oman on how to set up the payment system for ships that are going to transit the Strait of Hormuz, because half of that strait is the property of Oman under international law. You got some that try to pretend, oh no, that's an international waterway. No, it isn't. It's within the territorial waters of these countries, and then they have every right in the world to control access if they want. It wasn't a question prior to the unprovoked vicious attacks by Israel and the United States on Iran. That's now changed the calculus.
Larry, the new reports coming out, it shows that it seems on April 3rd, if you remember, one of the F-16 in the airspace of Iran was hit, and they were talking about air defense system, something like that, right? Right now, we've learned it was a dogfight between F-16 and F-4 Phantom.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Huh. It's just... They said that the F-16 got hit by F-4 in the airspace of Iran. It wasn't the air defense system hitting the footage. And I don't know how long does it take to the reality comes out of the operation, the whole concept of this operation, because in the latest days of the war, before announcing the ceasefire, we've seen some sort of improvements in the air defense system of Iran.
Yeah,
and
that was they started upgrading that immediately after the ceasefire on April 15th. So, and since April 15th, Iran has conducted at least two, let's call it live fire drills, air defense drills, particularly in Tehran. So, again, the United States may be miscalculating what its ability to what they call suppress enemy air defense, SEAD, and that's. But we're seeing this slow escalation right now. Sort of Iran fires at a U.S. ship, the U.S. fires and tries to sink U.S. Iranian tankers, and it's going to keep escalating. And so we'll be back in the full-blown exchange of multiple missile launches by Iran on a daily basis.
Do you see the attack, that major attack, we were talking about it before, happening before Donald Trump going to China or after?
Yeah, I in theory, you'd say, well, they're going to hold off, and that may be part of the U.S. effort to minimize its response. Because China has reportedly threatened that, hey, if you go back full blow against Iran, don't even think about coming. We got nothing to say to you. But I think the events independent of decisions made by Trump or the IRGC, that events can get out of hand, and then we'll be back into a full-blown war. And if that happens, Trump won't be going to China.
Larry, who's this new guy that Donald Trump added to the negotiating team, and to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner? It seems that he's a former IDF. Why is that, and how is that going to help Donald Trump?
Well, it's not. I mean, I forget the name. I think it was named Guy Schwartz or something from Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, FDD. He's just another, Israeli prostitute, essentially. And he's going to serve the interests of Israel over those of the United States. And, that's where Trump is. Trump is putting Israel first, the United States second, and that's enraging a lot of Americans now who are turning against Trump over that very issue. So this guy's, he's not going to make any difference in the process. Quote, adding him to the team, it doesn't make the team more capable, more competent, or more influential. But frankly, Iran is ignoring that team. Iran wants to, as I see it, Iran wants to have very little to do with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So, and I'm not sure what role I'm not sure they've got any better standing with the Kremlin now. But, he's, I'll call it rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Looking at China, Larry, if Donald Trump goes to China, do you think that for China it would be better to make some sort of deal considering Taiwan, or they see what has happened in Ukraine and later on with the case of Iran is somehow facilitating the process of Taiwan getting back to motherland?
Well, what do you mean? So what kind of deal do you think China would be willing to negotiate?
Because it seems that Donald Trump and his administration, they're feeling that they can make some sort of deal behind the scene to put pressure on Iran and Russia using China. That was the old plan with the case of the war in Ukraine. Right now, they're feeling that they can do something with the war on Iran. And how do you see China and their move?
Yeah, well, as I pointed out with, we talked a little bit ago about your language, the security architecture. The fact that China and Russia are using the same language in dealing with Iran shows that they are closely cooperating on this policy. There's no daylight between them. And, I think China's attitude really it's becoming more, why do we even need the United States? There was a time where they needed the United States and where China was quite willing to hold U.S. debt, buying up treasuries. No more. China continues to dump treasuries, buy gold, and recognizes that the United States is not a friendly country. The United States is selling weapons to Taiwan. So the Chinese are just going to wait the United States out. They're not going to they're not going to invade Taiwan. That's another piece of propaganda the United States keeps spending in order to justify increased defense spending. And yet what has happened as a consequence of first the war, the U.S.-backed war in Ukraine, and now the U.S.-backed war against Iran, that weapons systems that were originally supposed to be in Indo-PACOM, that's the U.S. military commando that has China in its sphere of influence. Weapon systems that are supposed to go to Indo-PACOM are being stripped from Indo-PACOM and sent to Central Command, CENTCOM, to be used in Iran. In fact, weapons that were supposed to go to Ukraine being halted and shifted to CENTCOM. So, what China's watching is the United States is essentially disarming itself and weakening itself militarily in terms of being able to use force to threaten China. In fact, I think the Chinese are very surprised with what the results of. They've looked at what the U.S. has been unable to do in Ukraine, what the U.S. was unable to do in the Red Sea against the Houthis, and now what the U.S. has been able to do with Iran. pretended to be important, and it turns out we're not as good or as tough as we claim to be.
Yeah, today, Ariel, I talked with Ambassador Chas Freeman, and when I asked him about the ceasefire, he said this is the ceasefire with Israeli characteristics. You know, it means that the type of Israeli type of ceasefire that Donald Trump, that the Trump administration right now is doing or considering with the case of Iran. What has happened, Larry, with this administration? I would say this is devastating for the foreign policy of the United States. When you talk about ceasefire and you continue in the way that the Israeli government, who's the most irresponsible government in the region, you're diminishing your position. You're not helping your position.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one more reminder that U.S. foreign policy has been hijacked by the Zionist lobby, and Trump has allowed that to happen. But there's widespread political support, at least within the establishment in Washington, D.C. But Israel clearly has suffered some setbacks, but I'm not at all convinced that the grip they have on the balls of the Washington elite is lessened at all.
They were talking last night. They said on Channel 14, they said that Israel is ready to the ceasefire is over. We're ready to get back to the fight. What are the capabilities of Israel if let's assume the United States decides to attack Iran? Israel, go first. You go first. What are their capabilities and how they're going to defend themselves against, the escalations?
Well, again, let's look at Israel always exaggerates its capabilities. And so let's step back and look at, have they been able to defeat Hamas and take full control of the Gaza Strip? No, they haven't. Even though basically Hamas is nothing more than just an insurgent force. They're not a full-scale army. They don't have some sophisticated systems even that Hezbollah does. Similarly, they've been unable to defeat, dislodge Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and all the while showing they'll blow up and destroy key parts of Lebanon. But there are limits to Israel's power. And then you got to deal with the retaliation. They don't have an air defense system that is effective against Iranian ballistic missiles, particularly the hypersonic ones. So this lull in the war that we have, when it reignites, the Israelis are going to be hiding in their cellars again. And I think this go round, they're going to suffer much more damage. They already suffered significant damage during the first go round. This next go round will be worse.
Smotrich, Larry is talking about. He said that to put an end to the war, we have to move the boundaries, or we have to change the boundaries of Israel. He said just now the map is going to get bigger, not only in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria. And all of that going to get to it's going to be in the Israeli hand. And
yeah, that's the dream. But look, the problem they got, Nima, it's one of numbers. At its height, Israel had like 10 million people there. I think it's down more like 8 million now, that at least 2 million have fled. They don't have an army and an economy that can sustain such expansion. It just simply can't. They will be chewed apart bit by bit with all the different entities that will oppose them. Again, this shows these are not rational people. These are not people that are thinking like you do logically and saying, it's like, I'm going to buy a car. Do I make enough money every month to pay for that car? Oh, I don't. Well, I can't buy the car. No, They're not engaged in that rational thinking. Yeah, I want the Lamborghini. Well, can you afford it? I want it. Just give me the Lamborghini and we'll work it out later. Okay. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to handle those payments.
Larry, you remember before the war against Iran started, Benjamin Netanyahu was arguing that the acts of resistance is somehow disappearing from the scene. The assassination in Lebanon, the case of fall of Bashar Assad, and they said that the final, attack going to be on Iran and they're going to destroy, and the acts of resistance going to, disappear or weaken. And look at what is happening right now. Basically, we're not hearing anything about Ansarullah. They're not in the game. They didn't use the acts. They were not part of the war, basically. And right now, you're not hearing anything about them.
Right.
And Bab al-Mandab as well. And I don't know how much of these tankers are passing through the Bab al-Mandab and the Red Sea, because we had some sort of reports that the tankers are using the alternative route to get to their destiny. But how do you find acts of resistance after all? Because Israel is feeling that he can get all of these territories that they tried to occupy.
Yeah, well, that's what I said. They won't be able to sustain it. They can initially put a presence there, but then the issue is, can you sustain it? So the Houthis have been quiet throughout this. They haven't been engaged yet. But I think if we go back to war, then you're going to find likely the Houthis will get re-engaged. And they'll start hitting Israel as well with missiles. But the Red Sea is still basically shut to Israeli traffic. But a number of ships, for insurance sake, they don't take the Red Sea; they go around. So we'll see. Like I said, when this war reignites and reunites full scale. I think we'll see the Ansar al-Allah, the Houthis get back engaged.
This reignition of the war gonna last. How long is it gonna last?
Don't know. It's gonna last.
I know that depends on the intensity of the war, but we know the ammunition are so important, and missiles, interceptors, they're all part of the calculation.
Yeah, I think the primary factor determining the length of this war will be the international economy. Once a financial crisis fully ensues, and you've got, at a minimum, a global recession, more likely a global depression. And what that means is production has fallen 10% or more. So you've got, instead of the economy's growing at 1%, 2%, 3%, they're contracting at a rate of 10%. So that's significant. And when you get that, you're going to get great political upheaval around the world. There will be people that are starving to death, famine. There are going to be mass shortages. It will be quite chaotic. And so in that situation, the ability of the United States to sustain these attacks on Iran they'll dissipate. Plus, as you intimated, the United States is not able to make enough replacements for Tomahawks and the JASSMs that they use as primary weapons against Iran when they launch bombing raids, because they try to keep U.S. jets from flying over Iranian territory. But the United States, to make those weapons, needs rare earth minerals that come out of China, and China is not selling them the rare earth minerals. So this is, and that I think we're going to see increasingly becomes an issue, that China is not going to give the United States the material to make weapons that the U.S. intends to use against China. That's insane.